Good morning. Kyleigh, how are you? So I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Kyleigh Lipira, who is the current Chief Executive Officer for the Melanoma Research Foundation. And prior to join the MRF, she served she worked with the Johns Hopkins Medicine School of Medicine, and where she worked with the dermatology department, and where she was responsible for helping the department raising funds to support numerous melanoma clinical trials. So Kyleigh, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us on this Beating Melanoma project.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dr. Wang. It's a privilege to be here.
Call me Steve. Call me Steve. So a couple of things. So, and I've always known about the MRF Melanoma Research Foundation for a long time, and you guys do such a great work. And maybe you can just tell our audience a little bit about, what is MRF, its origin, and what's your mission?
Sure, absolutely. So the Melanoma Research Foundation was founded about 26 years ago by a patient. And at the time, as you know well, there were not very many treatment options for metastatic melanoma patients. And in fact, this young woman was dealing with her third recurrence of
Wow.
melanoma. And she was basically told at a very young age, in her 30s, that there was nothing more that could be done. So it was really her advocacy that started the foundation, and she started fundraising and helped form the foundation. And in 1996, we gave out our first research grant. And over the years, the mission of the foundation has changed. We started off by just really being a funder to get research going and supporting the clinical activities that need to be done to help patients. But today, our mission is a tripartite mission. So we funded over 23 million in research grants to date, which is phenomenal. And that is to academic centers all over the country. We are also an educator of patients and caregivers. So people come to our website, melanoma.org, to learn about the disease, to learn about treatment options, to learn about clinical trial opportunities, to really make sure that they are armed to deal with their diagnosis. And then we're also an advocate. So we advocate both on the federal and state level. So every year we invite our advocates to Washington, D.C. to meet with their lawmakers, to share their stories, to really help get funding for melanoma research from the government, but also for them to be aware of the needs of melanoma patients, which is really important.
No, so there's a lot I think it's amazing just in the short span of time, and you guys have grown into such a powerful force. And many of my colleagues, both in the dermatologists as well as medical oncologists, surgical oncologists, have sort of became involved with your organization. I know all the great work you guys are doing. Now, from the patient's perspective, can we first talk about from the educational component? Obviously, once you get the diagnosis of melanoma, I call that like the mad rush phase. You're so anxious, right? You want information. How do people, did they just go onto your website, or is there a better way to access this information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, human nature is when you are dealing with any type of diagnosis, you go to Google,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of the information that you're going to find might not be the most up to date or the most reputable. So, what we really encourage people to do is come to our site. And whenever you're dealing with a cancer diagnosis, I would encourage any patient to really find information from an advocacy organization, because you're really going to get unbiased information. You're going to get up-to-date information. So many people do come to our website, again, melanoma.org first, to learn about their disease. And we have a ton of resources for patients, recently diagnosed patients, patients who might be dealing with even a stage 4 diagnosis. We have a lot of tools on our website. So whether they're looking to find a treatment center, we have something called a treatment center finder, where they could find where they could be treated in their community. We have a clinical trial finder, which is also another great tool. There's over 1,000 clinical trials right now in melanoma. And it's really overwhelming. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, it's just a really hard site for patients.
Very difficult site.
Yeah. So we really try to make it easy for patients so that they can get information. And then again, go back to their doctor. What we want them to do is take the information back to their doctor, have the conversation, right, about what their options are. And then we have other great resources for caregivers as well, who really are oftentimes the ones finding the information because it's just so overwhelming for the patient. So they're really being their loved one's advocate and finding the resources. So a lot of caregivers come to our site as well. And we have tools there that take really big concepts and distill them down into videos. We have these animated melanoma patient videos that are fantastic that, again, take big therapies or big questions and take them down to 7 minutes of animation where they can learn more, but it's not so complicated. It's not in medical jargon, it's really in layman's terms.
Yeah, I've actually, so in the process of writing this book and sort of doing this video interviewing all the experts, I've visited your site. I think it's very, very helpful. And we're definitely going to put some of the links and especially, the treatment centers and as well as the clinical trials. And I think we don't talk enough about the clinical trials, right? And even though we made such enormous progress, but there are still patients that are failing the standard immunotherapy or targeted therapy. And you're absolutely right. The clinicaltrial.gov site is pretty difficult for layperson, and because there's so much information there.
There's so much, and it's such an overwhelming time for patients anyway who are
Yeah.
dealing with their personal lives and work and trying to navigate treatment, how they're getting to treatment, how they're paying for treatment, So anything that we can do to alleviate or make it easier is our goal. And we have a new program that we've just relaunched. It's called Ask a Nurse. So we have
wow.
with staff, and her email is askanurse@melanoma.org. And people can email her if they have questions. And that's just that's a real person that's available to patients to answer questions. Because I think a lot of times too, maybe you can't reach your treatment team, or maybe you asked a question or you forgot to ask a question when you were seeing your doctor. So it's just another resource for patients while they're going through.
And then is that nurse actually giving medical advice, or is it, am I just thinking from the medical legal perspective?
Yeah, so not medical advice. She's
Okay.
pointing them to resources.
Plain
So
resources.
yeah, so she's helping connect them to resources. So sometimes there's questions about insurance reimbursement, or maybe it's a question about a caregiver resource. So what she's doing, she's really connecting the dots for patients and getting them to resources or other groups that are providing those resources for them. So
Only
financial,
specifically tailored for melanoma patients.
yes, only melanoma patients. And a lot of the questions we get are surrounding financial assistance.
I see.
So she's able to direct them to the right resources for things like that.
And then financial resource, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest barrier a lot of patients face because, especially dealing with late stage stage 4, some of the immunotherapies, they can be very costly.
Yeah.
So what are some of the resources that are available out there?
So there's a lot of really fantastic groups that help with some of the financial barriers
Mm.
that exist for patients, and we have them on our website. The one group that does great work is the PAN Foundation, and they help with the financial assistance piece. But again, it's very overwhelming. Sometimes the funds are limited, or sometimes they have the funds available and they dry up quickly. So what we really help patients do is sort of navigate the
I see.
many different resources that are out there so that they can get to the right place. And it's hard for patients to do that on their own.
No, it's
It's
very
hard for them
difficult.
to sort of figure out where to go and who to talk to. And, again, it's time consuming. So if we can really help eliminate some of those obstacles, that's really what our goal is to make it easier for patients and their loved ones so that they can get where they need to get quicker, more efficiently, more effectively, that'll lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, I think what you guys are doing is so special because, as a physicians, we sort of focused only on the medical aspect, right? We're only thinking about the medical aspect for that patients, but you're looking at this from the comprehensive manners that not only addressing you, educating the patient and you directing to the right place, you're sending them to, possible tertiary care centers. But this piece about financial support, how to get the financial resource for the patient and the caregiver, is something I think it's missing. Not too many organizations is doing. So it's a really, really great, valuable resource.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It really helps. And again, we are not the ones giving the financial resources, but we're the ones connecting them with the groups that are. So it's really, that one-to-one
Yeah.
relationship, which is really
You talked about a little bit about the various clinical centers that you can refer to, as well as local resources for receiving the care. What are some of your criteria? What is your team's criteria in selecting, what is a good center? What is a good physician to go to? Because this is a question that a lot of patients have, right? And you want the best expert to take care of you, but most of the time, patients may not have the expertise in sort of gauge who is a really, really good physician, who is a really good center. What is your criteria?
So we go by the NCI designated cancer centers with melanoma programs.
Mhm.
So that really is sort of the base for our treatment center finder. So again, if you're not living close to an NCI designated cancer center, again, that's a conversation that you would need to have sort of with your doctor. But again, what we strive for is for it to be open dialogue with wherever patients are being treated, so that we can provide them with enough information that they can go back and ask their doctor. And if they have questions and they're not feeling that they're getting answered, that they can go to a bigger resource where they see more melanoma patients.
Yeah, I think that makes a huge difference, right? And especially those tertiary centers, they have the entire team of folks who's sort of dedicated only sort of focused on melanoma. And it's absolutely right, the NCCN guidelines. Now, let's shift gear a little bit. And we touched a lot about the resource. Why don't we talk a little bit about the research that you guys are supporting, and maybe you can give our audience a little perspective about what's coming around the corner, because you sort of supported some of the early basic trials and also some of the late stage work.
Absolutely. So that's a great question. So the way we fund research is that we have a scientific advisory committee. So we send out a request for proposals to academic centers. They will submit the proposal to us, and then our scientific advisory committee will score the proposal.
Mm.
So we use the NIH scoring system. So it's very competitive. And what our goal is to fund the most competitive, aggressive proposals that will benefit patients, right? So we want to fund the best science we can possibly fund that will directly impact and benefit patients and their loved ones. So over the years, that's been about 23 million in research, and it varies every year. So we fund research in uveal melanoma, which again only has one FDA-approved treatment. We've funded mucosal melanoma research. We've funded basic science research, and we've funded translational research. So we really fund the gamut. But the main criteria is how strong the proposal is, right? So how strong is the proposal? How good is the science that we know that this will benefit patients? So there's been quite a variety in terms of the areas that we've focused on. It's been everything from brain metastases, which we all know is a major concern for metastatic melanoma patients. We have focused on pediatric melanoma, which again is an area that is under-researched and under-supported, and really a big area. We've also focused on mucosal melanoma, which again
Yeah.
only is 2% of all diagnosed melanomas, but has poor outcomes and really is diagnosed at later stages, which make it very hard to treat.
Definitely. Definitely. So you basically cover the full gamut from basic science, translational. Any clinical trials?
We have not funded any specific clinical trials. Again, we leave that to the pharmaceutical industry. But really translational research, things that are really going to benefit patients.
Yeah, I know a lot of the recipients from your grants, from your awards, have subsequently gone on and submitted an NIH grant, and you sort of it's a kind of pilot and proving that their research is in the right track. So it's a really great work. No, One other thing is, so how do patients, let's say, who have melanoma survivors, like how do they come back and contribute to your organization? And obviously it's on one side, let's say, for someone who just been diagnosed with melanoma and they want to receive as much support, information. But what I find a lot of my patients afterwards is they want to do something, right? And they want to basically be a part of the network support group to give back. How is there opportunity for patients to engage with MRF?
Absolutely. It's such a great question. And it's something that we really love to see. Being a national foundation, we're really able to engage with patients and the community across the US. So we have a lot of ways that patients can get involved. We have a national Miles for Melanoma 5K walk run. So people can form teams, they can come out to the community, they can engage, they can even be on the planning committee if they want. So
Hmm.
it's a great way. And those events are amazing. People, they walk or they run. We have skin checks on site. They could develop, get team shirts for their team. And it's just a really great community event. And that's a really great way for people to engage. The
How,
other
how do people, so do you reach out actively to the local um, individuals who are passionate to do this, or they can just reach out to you and you organize it in a ad hoc manner, or do you do it, let's say, on every in May, or can you do it any times throughout the year?
Yeah, great questions. So we have 16 walk runs across the US, and they're all listed on our website,
Okay.
melanoma.org. And people can go on and they can register for the event. There's information on there if they want to get more involved, if they want to perhaps join the committee, if they want to sponsor. So it just depends if we have one in their local community. If we don't, there are still ways that people can get involved. And one of my personal favorite ways is for our patients or caregivers to act as grant reviewers. So we include advocates in our grant review process. And it's really cool because they get to be a part of the grant review with our scientific advisory committee and lend their perspective
Well,
grants, which is really fulfilling for patients.
but how do they play this role? Because, they may not have the clinical or medical expertise to make that same judgment.
Yeah, it's a great question. So, what they're really looking at it is through the lens of a patient,
Okay.
right? So, if they're reading a proposal and the proposal says a patient is going to come in every day for a blood draw, and then they're going to have to come back in 3 days for infusion, their perspective might be like, this is going to be really hard on patients. I don't know if that's something that a patient would be able to do. So, we're really involving patients in the whole process, right? So it's really important for them to give their perspective. And the conversations that happen between the patient reviewers and the clinical reviewers is absolutely fascinating. And a lot of the times the clinicians will say, wow, I never looked at it from that side, or wow, you're right. That could be a benefit or it could be a hindrance for this particular proposal. And it's been a really rewarding experience for patients to use their
No,
voice.
can anyone, what is your selection criteria for putting those non-physician into that review committee?
So there's an application. So they
Okay.
would have to fill out an application and it would have to be submitted to our science officer and it would be reviewed and then they would be selected from there. But it's a really great opportunity because as you know, the FDA really wants patients involved in the drug development process. So, we're doing it even a step earlier and saying we're going to get patients involved in the basic research and the translational research process.
It's kind of cool. It's a very democratic process, It's patients should be involved because a lot of times when we design in the trials, we may forget uh, the barriers, right?
Yeah.
And the burden that imposed on the patient and the family members. And so, all right. So we talked about the walk. We talked about this idea of serving on the committee.
Yeah.
And what else can they do?
So again, attending a patient symposium. So we host patient symposium all over the country
Hmm.
at major academic centers. We typically host 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall. We have one focused on uveal melanoma, and then we have one focused on either pediatric or adult young AYA, which is adolescent young adult melanoma. And those are events that we would love people to volunteer at. We'd love them to attend. But there's some ways that people can get involved in that way too. If they're living in one of those areas that we have these events, we're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for people to come out and help support these events for patients.
That's fantastic. And do you guys have any local chapters? Because I know it's based in Washington, D.C., the headquarters, right?
Yeah.
And, since you're talking about national organization, you have such a wide reach to the whole country. Do you have any like local chapters or no, at this point, no?
Yeah, we're not chapter based, but we're national. So
Okay.
kind of what I was talking about earlier, being in 16 cities with our Miles for Melanoma. We're at 6 different academic centers. And again, all that information is on our website. And then the opportunity to come to DC in March every year and use your voice with lawmakers. I think that is probably one of the most incredible opportunities that patients and caregivers have, is to go to DC and share their story. Share their
When is this event taking place? In May or June or
It's in March. So we
okay,
typically
March?
do it in early March because it's before the Appropriations Committee meets. And what we have been advocating for is federal funding of melanoma research. So I can definitely share this year's dates and information with you as well. But it's always the first part of March. And I personally think there's really no better way to use your voice than to speak with lawmakers and tell them about your journey as a patient or your journey as a caregiver, and what lawmakers can do really to benefit the melanoma community and make it better for patients and their loved ones.
And not to mention this sort of or coming down to DC, you meet your fellow like melanoma survivor patients, and there's something very cathartic and nurturing, and to hear everyone's story, and you get inspiration from that, right? And hope as well. Yeah.
You do, and you also get some of your power back too, right? I think as patients, you feel powerless. You feel really powerless with everything you're dealing with and going through. And I think you take a little bit of the power back and go and use your story to help make change, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah, that's what a lot of my patients that's one of the reasons why they get involved in that in that channel, because like you said, it's this maybe giving back or power or for whatever reason, it's a very cathartic process.
Yeah.
We don't have much time left. I mean, I'd love to keep talking to you about, your organization and some of the psychology behind the melanoma survivors. Where do you think, from your perspective, right? Where do you think in the next 5 years this field is going? And, what research or maybe any last words of wisdom or inspirational words that you can leave with our audience?
Sure. I think we've come a long way in 26 years. I started this conversation talking about our founder, the patient who founded the foundation, who was diagnosed in her early 30s with stage 4 metastatic melanoma and had no options.
No options, no.
Today, there are, 18 approved treatments for cutaneous and uveal melanoma. We've come a long way. There's a lot of hope. And I think right now, where we can look in the next 5 years, there's a lot of new emerging technologies, right? There's a lot of new things that are on the horizon that I've never even thought about before. You look at AI, you look at cellular therapy, you look at all these cool things, melanoma vaccine. There's a lot of promise, and I think a lot of new things that are going to come out. And I think there's a lot of great minds working on the problem. One of our scientific advisory co-chairs always said back when he started, melanoma was the cancer that gave cancer a bad name. It was the one cancer that there weren't a lot of options for. Clinicians and researchers didn't really want to go into the field because it was just so hard, and there wasn't a lot of progress. And now it's the complete opposite, right?
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right.
50% of metastatic melanoma patients are NED, which is unreal. Like you can't say that with a lot of other cancers. And I think there's just a lot of hope and there's a lot of new emerging technologies and there's a lot that is on the horizon that patients can be excited about.
Well, thank you very much for that last thought, and truly very inspirational and give people a lot of hope, and I think this is absolutely great. Kyleigh, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and I'll be sure to leave a whole bunch of different links in these videos, and so that patients can access all the resources the MRF provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Take care.
Bye.